Zelensky's comedy troupe has become a political burden. Friends, this is the headline of another article from the Times, which tells about the closest circle of Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, that he brought with him. At the beginning of his term, he surrounded himself in key positions. Basically, he filled them with his colleagues from Kvartal 95 and people from business, both as president and in his closest circle. They even provide a comparative table showing who came with Volodymyr Zelensky and who still remains with him now. They name 15 individuals, 9 of whom have already been dismissed for various reasons. The most recent ones, of course, are Andriy Yermak. You can see him at the top in the left column. This article also discusses the fact that for some reason, this is something people keep bringing up to Volodymyr Zelensky. What is it really about? The main violation of his campaign promise was that there would be no friends in politics, in the leadership of the state. But here they were with Volodymyr Zelensky, and obviously they played a bad joke on him. And here the irony from the authors is that the comedian actor Zelensky is being played bad jokes by politics itself. That is, his comedic career is turning against him. And a few more quotes. The Times reminds us that Zelensky appointed Ivan Bakanov, a childhood friend, as head of the SBU, who was later dismissed. He also appointed Serhiy Shefir, co-founder of Kvartal 95, as his assistant, and Serhiy Trofimov, executive producer of Kvartal 95, as the first deputy head of the president's office. Serhiy Sivoka, who is now deceased, yes, the one who got into a certain scandal while he was still alive before he passed away. The creative producer of the studio was appointed as an advisor to the executive secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Yuri Kryvyk. Kostyuk, for example, the screenwriter of the film Servant of the People, who also at one time became the deputy head of the president's office. Out of 15 former employees of Kvartal, according to the publication The Times, who were appointed to leadership positions, 9. Later, some were dismissed, including Bakanov, Shefir, Trofimov, and Sivi. Corruption scandals have happened before, this is also a quote, but the current crisis is especially dangerous because of its proximity to the centers of power, which gives Russian propagandists ammunition. Yes, however, and more importantly, it may raise questions among Ukraine's allies at this very difficult time for the country. And so reading this article, in principle, the appearance of this review right now, the one you're watching, it is more connected with, well, I would say the extraordinary, I'm choosing my words, foresight, some kind of intuition, a gut feeling of one member of parliament from the Servant of the People party. Especially this phrase, as for the proximity, the crisis is particularly dangerous because of its closeness to the authorities, as it gives Russian propagandists ready-made arguments, right? And look, literally, less than a day later, Honcharенko, an absolute political opponent in parliament of the Servant of the People faction, quoted from a post by Dmytro Chorny. Dmytro Chorny, friends, is a devoted ideological supporter of Volodymyr Zelensky and a proponent of the Servant of the People party's ideology. I think that it's people like Dmytro Chorny who are the backbone of this party. And now, look at what Honcharенko writes about Dmytro Chorny's post. And Dmytro Chorny's post concerns the elections, whether or not it's the right time to hold them in Ukraine. Look, sometimes things happen at the wrong time, but I agree with my colleague Dmytro Chorny. And here is a quote from Chorny. Putin has announced a casting call for his favorite inside Ukraine. And now, regarding the active pro-Russian statements about the elections, certain Ukrainian politicians already have specific candidates emerging. Here's another excerpt. Russia is already buying up certain politicians and political parties to undermine our unity from within, Dmytro stated. Chorny. Can you imagine that? And I just quoted from The Times, which is published almost at the same time, where, and I quote directly, corruption scandals provide Russian propagandists with ready-made arguments. This is a very interesting story. Who exactly does Russia want to buy, and why has the Russian Federation latched onto this idea of holding elections right now? Let me remind you that, in fact, this discussion has been ongoing since the summer, when Donald Trump, during a personal meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, in the Oval Office, jokingly remarked whether Volodymyr Zelensky would remain president forever if martial law in Ukraine continued indefinitely. To which Zelensky jokingly replied, "You'd like that too, wouldn't you?" But obviously, we are now reaching the climax of this story. Will there be elections or not? It was Donald Trump who started this discussion about 6 months ago. The European Union is supporting the discussion. Last week, Zelensky made a statement saying that he is not opposed to organizing a vote specifically for the presidential elections, friends, not parliamentary, but presidential. And that for this, only certain security guarantees are needed, which must be ensured throughout the entire territory of Ukraine, including regions close to the front line and nearby territorial communities. And somehow we absolutely need to figure out, for example, the precise mechanism of how a soldier who is currently serving diligently in the Ukrainian Defense Forces can actually cast their vote, and so on. He starts playing this intricate game, but at the very same time, my dear friends, Putin also simultaneously starts playing this identical complex game. Yes, exactly. That's how it is. Look, here's what Putin said last Friday during his traditional live Q&A, in case you missed it. The results for 2025 regarding the elections in Ukraine. Look,
we did precisely what we believed was absolutely necessary, and the duly appointed representatives of the Kyiv regime, if they genuinely desire to, can certainly do exactly the same. However, if their intention is to strategically utilize these upcoming elections to halt the inevitable next advance of Russian troops, then that would undeniably be a profoundly misguided and incorrect choice. And in fact, I'll say something now that might sound unexpected. We are ready to consider measures to ensure the security of the elections in Ukraine. At the very least, to absolutely refrain from launching any significant strikes deep into the enemy's territory, especially on the crucial election day. But of course, there is one extremely important issue here that we simply cannot afford to ignore. But
specifically on the territory of the Russian Federation and the new subjects of the Russian Federation, as Putin calls them, these are the occupied regions. Parts of Kherson, parts of Zaporizhia, parts of Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Putin says that between 5 and 10 million Ukrainians live there. And now it becomes clear why Putin is starting to play this game. We will stop shooting for a moment deeper into the territory for the time of voting, and it is also necessary to give others the opportunity to vote as well. Someone of whom there are between 5 and 10 million. Can you even imagine that number? From 5 to 10 million. That's the entire electoral potential of all the parties in Ukraine. This is what Putin has in mind. And Zelensky, either out of misunderstanding or simply not seeing this threat, makes a statement like this, that he is ready to give the opportunity to allow Ukrainians who are abroad to take part in the elections. Look through Diia online.
through Diia or other electronic means for Ukrainians abroad, I've always supported and raised the issue, even back at the start of COVID, about legislative changes so that people could vote online. So far, there is no consensus with the parliamentarians.
Yes, there isn't. There is no consensus with the parliamentarians. Let me quote for you. Here is the consensus with the parliamentarians for you. A ceasefire during the presidential elections, as Putin talks about, does not solve any of the key problems. This is what Honcharenko writes. First, the military, that is almost 1 million people, will not be able to participate properly in the elections, well, because of the situation. Second, Ukrainians abroad, that is several million people, will not be able to participate properly in the elections. And here, about Ukrainians abroad, those Ukrainians in Russia, the 5 to 10 million that Putin talks about, he means people with Ukrainian passports. Yes, those are also Ukrainians abroad. Next, the authorities will continue to dominate the media space, as well as have the means to restrict other candidates. Well, that's the question. We understand where this is heading. If Zelensky wants to carry out the ritual of dropping ballots into boxes, then that's the perfect scenario. He remains president, and we live in Ukraine for another 5 years. Dreams. Volodymyr Alexandrovich and Tymur Mindiach, once again against Mura Mindiach. Mindiach has been found. Ukrainska Pravda wrote that. Yes, that's the case. In Israel, he keeps a very low profile, wears glasses and a hat, even though it's really hot there. But this is already a story about the entourage that is dragging Volodymyr Zelensky down, somewhere completely downward, and he needs to get rid of them. By the way, Kolomoisky points this out. He says that Zelensky will not run in the elections. Zelensky will let everything slip away. Well, they got rid of Yermak, and without Yermak, there's nothing left to do there. There's no one to organize all of this. But friends, I absolutely disagree with this position. And it seems to me that for Volodymyr Zelensky, this position of Honcharenko is also somewhere far, far behind. Why? Because here's the next post. Honcharenko, who explains why the head of the Servant of the People party was just replaced. Not because Kornienko supposedly had conflicts with Yermak, which are no longer there. That is, Yermak is obviously somewhere, but he no longer holds the position, and we don't see that kind of public influence from him now. So before being elected as an MP, Kornienko was a political strategist and worked on elections. His election as party leader signals preparation for elections. Yes, absolutely. That could be true. And not just true. Today, Davy Tarakamia, the head of the Servant of the People faction, made a post like this. Let me read it out. According to a prior agreement, a working group is being formed in the Verkhovna Rada regarding the prompt consideration of the issue of holding possible presidential elections in Ukraine during martial law. The discussion will take place within the Profile Committee of the Verkhovna Rada on the organization of state power, local self-government, regional development, and urban planning, with the involvement of representatives from all parliamentary factions and groups, the Central Election Commission, as well as public organizations engaged in election-related issues. The date and time of the meeting will be announced soon. Media representatives will also be invited. The process. Friends, this process has been launched, and obviously this is it. This is an attempt to stop this process. Or if you want, the so-called independent opinion of the reputable publication Ditinska, I very much doubt that it's any kind of independent opinion. The danger lies elsewhere. The danger is different. It seems to me that the real danger lies in the opportunities that the Russian Federation might take advantage of, not just by finding or announcing, as Chorny writes, a contest for a pro-Russian candidate somewhere among the Ukrainian political forces that are registered and exist here, but in this extremely cunning plan involving some 5 to 10 million Ukrainians living in the territory of the Russian Federation who supposedly must vote.